I recently got asked if I could do a fluid simulation in 3D for a commercial, and unfortunately I charged too much.
So rich!
But what I did was I walked the VFX artist through how I would accomplish what he needs to accomplish. Then I figured, man, I should have done that in a video on my channel, because then I could have just sent him the video and, you know, hundreds or even thousands or billions of others could see that too and learn from it. Because as you guys know, or maybe not know, I got pretty decent at fluid simulations because of my little diarrhea scene. And so I figured, you know what, I'm gonna do it again for you guys, make a little fluid tutorial here on my channel. We are using Blender 3D. It's a free software. Anyone with a computer can download it, even you. So even if you never touched 3D before, you can download the software right now and go through this tutorial with me and learn some cool tricks, how you can make awesome scenes. Enough talk, let's get to it. What are we gonna create? I'm gonna go through the basics of fluid simulations and how you can use them. So even you can make a cool diarrhea scene or whatever fluid you are into in your movie or film or video or whatever you're doing. So when you open up Blender, this is what it looks like for me. You probably have a default cube. So we need two things for fluid simulation. We need a domain where the fluid can exist within, and we need a flow, something where the fluid comes from. And both can just be a simple cube. So with Shift A, we're gonna make a cube. Bring it up, make it bigger, bring it up, Control A, and then we apply the scale. Now on the right here, under the physics properties, we can make it a fluid. And now we have to select the type, which is gonna be the domain. Again, the domain is basically the house, the housing, the shell where the fluid can exist in. Anything outside is not gonna have any fluid in it, only everything inside. So under the settings here, we don't want gas, we want liquid. Now it's solid because we didn't bake the animation yet. And there are a few numbers which are very important. The resolution divisions, the higher this number is, the better it's gonna look, but also the more accurate your fluid is gonna flow. Imagine a bathtub full with water. Like if you have big chunks, it doesn't really know how to interact, but if you have smaller chunks though, so this number here has to be bigger, the resolution has to be bigger, then the fluid is gonna interact properly. For tutorial purposes, I'm gonna keep this number low, like 32, maybe 64 later. But for your own personal projects, you want to at least get it to like 128 or even double that, 256 or even double that. But 256 is a great start, because when it comes to those little spray and foam and whatnot, you can do that with particles, but more on that by the end of the video, so make sure to stay tuned. Again, for tutorial purposes, we're going to keep this number low. Okay, we can ignore that. Border collisions are important. If the kind of fluid you have, if you just want it to disappear after it hits the borders of your domain, then you just check those off. In our particular case, we want to keep those borders so we can actually see what's happening. So we're gonna keep that. We scroll down, we need mesh, and we need particles, we need spray, foam, and bubbles. More on that later. Again, this part is very important, but I'm gonna keep that for the end. Under cache, go on type and click on all. That means that it renders all of those things we just checked on. And now we're done with the domain for now. I'm just gonna call this thing domain so we know what we're working with. What we need next is another object which is gonna be our fluid emitter. And it can go different ways. Either you have an inflow where you have an object and out of this object it just keeps generating the fluid, or this object itself is just going to be the fluid and it's just going to drop, and I'm going to show you the difference in a second. At first we have to make another object. Let's stick with the cube to keep it simple. This cube is inside here. Make it a little smaller. Let's bring this up. Now on our physics properties, we go again on fluid This time we don't go on domain, we go on flow. Again, flow type is gonna be liquid. I'm gonna show you the difference between geometry and inflow. Geometry means this cube is just gonna become liquid and it's just gonna drop. If I change it to inflow, then it's just gonna keep creating more fluid, and I'm going to show you the difference right now. Go back to geometry. Now to actually see what's happening, because right now nothing is happening, you have to bake your simulation, and that always takes a little. Here we're going to call this flow. This is our second cube. We go back to our domain, scroll all the way down and bake all. But it's important to decide how many frames you want to bake. For now, we're just going to do 100 because that's enough for tutorial purposes, but it really depends on how long your scene is. But 100 frames is approximately 4 seconds, and that should be enough. So now I'm baking all, you see it's baking. Now when we look at it, you see that our cube here just becomes a little cube, fluid cube. It just drops, and then eventually lands. You can see here, those huge chunks here, those are that big because our resolution up here, what we selected, 32, because our resolution is so big, that's why those chunks are so big. So if you crank up this number here, those chunks are going to be smaller. But already, pretty cool. It drops, and you can see this is our edge of our domain. This is why it doesn't go further. If our domain was bigger, it would just go further. But that's the size of our domain. Those little sprinkles here, those are going to be our particles, which are not visible until you actually make particle objects. But again, more about that later. First, I want to show you, instead of it being a geometry fluid, if we every time you want to change something, you have to free all. And now we go back to our flow, and instead of geometry, we're going to go on inflow. And now when we go back to our domain, don't change any other settings, just bake it again. It's going to take a little longer because more liquid is going to be generated because it keeps coming. Now you can see it just keeps flowing like a sink or something. We only baked 100 frames, that's why it stops here. But that's already pretty cool. Yeah, if I baked it for 500 frames or 1,000 frames, it would probably fill up the entire domain. The really confusing part is that some settings are in the flow, where the particles come from, and the other settings are in the domain. This is really the difficult part, but I just suggest just start playing around with it until you figure out what it really does, because you just have to practice. Because I could tell you as much as I want, if you don't practice and try yourself, you're never going to learn it. But that's true for most things, right? So just keep doing it, the same thing, make mistakes, learn from them. And now I'm just going to go back to inflow, because that's what I want for this scene. Go back to domain. We're going to increase the resolution to 64. Now we're going to bake it again, and you see already it takes a little longer. But you know, I want to show you something presentable in the end, so at least it should be 64. If it was like a real scene or something is really happening, I would probably crank it up to 200 or more. See, already you can see it takes a little longer to watch, but you can tell it just looks way better automatically. Okay, the next important step is right-click on your mesh and click on Shade Smooth. This is just gonna smooth out the mesh. It's just gonna look better in the end. Okay, now our liquid needs a material. And how do you make like a material? It really depends on what is it you make here. But any kind of normal liquid, let's say water here, hope you can tell. You can just see what it looks like, water. And when you shake it, you can see, I don't know if you see it right now, but there's bubbles inside because I shake it until the air gets in the water. But water basically has the same material like glass. In Lucky Us, in Blender, there's a setup for that already. When we go to our shader editor, I have it always open here. Click on New. We'll just give this a name, Liquid. We can just delete this guy. Click on it, hit X, it's gone. With Shift A, we can make a new one. Just call it Glass. Hit this, hook this up with Surface. And now this already is gonna look like water. It's basically just transparent. This is just our material preview, so it's not what it's actually gonna look like in the end. If I wanna see what it actually looks like, I have to go to Cycles and actually hook up some light. Let's do that real quick. Now the tricky part is to figure out, because there's lots of black in our water, and that it has nothing to do with our scene, but it does have to do with our light bounces. Because water and liquids has lots of transparency, so we need to crank up our transparency bounces. That's gonna fix our the blackness in our shot. Now a very important part, something I said earlier, we need to hook up our particles. All these blue things here, they're just particles. Right now they're not visible in the actual render. To make them visible, you have to adjust a few things. And I usually go about it that way. I create a few objects, Shift A, Mesh, Icosphere, change this to 1. So that's very simple, a very simple object. With Shift D I can duplicate it. With Tab I can change it a little. I'm gonna do that a couple of times, just that I'm gonna have some variety. You don't understand what I'm doing right now, but what I'm gonna do is those objects are gonna be my particles. And they don't have to be very complex, really. The simpler, the better. I'm also gonna shade smooth them. So they're gonna be basically our spray, our water drops and everything that's floating around. So I just made 3, 1 would probably be enough, but just for tutorial purposes, I'm gonna make 3. I'm gonna select all of them, hit M, so I can move them into a new collection. I'm gonna name this Spray. And also I'm gonna give them a material, my liquid material. So now when I go over my view, this one is already liquid. Now I just have to make those as well. I can just link the materials and now those look the same. And all of these are in the same collection. So I made one for spray. Now I need one for foam and one for bubbles. So I'm gonna make that separate. I can move those wherever I want, it doesn't matter. Just make a new one. The reason why I use Icosphere is that it's very low poly, but it's still more poly than the cube. So it's somewhat a circle, but not really. But that really helps to sell the effect. Cubes would be not great. Spheres would be too big because spheres have lots of polygons and you want to keep it as little as possible to not make your computer flip out. Your computer is going to be mad at you, real mad. So now with this, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to copy it a few times. It's too much. Just change the look a little. I'm going to select all of them, move into a new collection. And this is going to be foam. I'm going to give it a new material. I have to set one up. I usually just make a emissive material, just white, because it's basically what it is. It's just foam is just white. There's probably a better way to do that. Usually that looks decent. Now I'm going to link the material of the others to the same thing. So now it's basically just white. Cool. Now I'm going to make one more collection. Now the icosphere here, I'm just going to do it more because bubbles are a little rounder than the rest. And here I don't even need more objects, I just need one because bubbles, they all look the same. They just have a different size. And here too, I'm just going to give it the liquid material. Right click, shade smooth. Okay, now we just have to hook them up. We have 3 different, I'm just going to make it a collection just for to keep it easier. New collection, bubbles, Again, you can make a selection, just hit it and then hit M, then you can put it in a collection. Okay, I have 3 different collections: spray, foam, and bubbles. Now when I go on my domain, on particle properties, I see all my different particles which I have going on here. When I go on spray, on render, right now it renders halos. I don't want halos, I want a collection. And here I can hook it up to the collection I made before, the spray collection. So now I already see lots of spray going on. All my different particles I see, I have like 1,000 times here. But now I just need to decrease the scale because I don't want them as big. But I want to randomize this and the scale too, so not all of them look the same. So now I have lots of different spray particles going around. And now we're going to do the same thing with the foam. Click on foam. Instead of halo, we want a collection. And under collection, we select our foam. And the foam is basically on top of our liquid mesh. So here too, decrease the size a little. And last step, go to bubbles. I can already tell my computer is slowing down like crazy. Under halo, go to collection. In that case, object would be okay too, because we only have one object in this collection, but just to keep it simple, let's make a collection as well. And under collection, I'm going to select my bubbles. Alright, just to explain it one more time what I did here, because I know that can be very confusing. The first part is creating the mesh, the liquid, which is floating around. I gave it a glass material because liquid is basically glass. Then I created particle collections, spray, foam, and bubbles. Gave those separate materials to make sure they look the way they are supposed to look. And then I got this result. And that way you can make very cool scenes to implement those in your videos or in your movies like I did and always do. So that way you can really enhance the production quality of your videos, real Hollywood phony style. And thank you so much for watching. If you're still watching, make sure to like the video and see you in the next video. I usually throw my beanie into the camera, but it's too warm for a beanie. Oh, hold up. There it is. Ah.